Thank you so much for attending our webinar today, How to Plan for Records Management in M365. We have a great lineup of speakers today. Regardless of industry or location, I know you'll find something worthwhile to take home for the next hour. It's worth noting that the demonstration is being recorded. We will be sending the recording out to all attendees. So if you enjoy the webinar today, feel free to share it with whoever you like. Or if you really don't like our webinar, feel free to share the recording with your enemies. So in the interest of time and to avoid technical issues, cameras and mics have been disabled for the presentation portion. However, the mic function will be enabled during the question period at the end. Also, the chat function is active. So you can see the show conversation button on the top of your screen there, a little chat bubble. If you'd like to type a question in the chat or a comment in the chat, you can use that, and we'll address them as the time permits. In order today, the speakers are George Dunn, President of Create Independent Consultants. Create has assisted hundreds of clients across many industries to plan for and address digital transformation, including capture, recognition, e-signature, ECM, digital workflow, RPA, AI recognition, machine learning, and integrated planning and process improvement. We also have Cindy Zubich. Cindy has worked as a certified records manager for over 25 years and has extensive experience creating and simplifying consolidated information governance, records management programs. She helps companies develop program policies, records retention schedules, procedures, and program documentation. Our third speaker today is Jordan Uytterhagen. He's the Managing Director of Cadence Solutions. Cadence Solutions is a recognized digital transformation leader and has extensive experience assisting organizations with automation of ECM systems, electronics records management, workflow, and complex system integration across numerous platforms, including Microsoft, OpenText, and SAP. Thank you, everyone, for listening. First up, we have George Dunn, President of Create. George, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. You know, M365 really is the platform that a lot of people are talking about today. A lot of organizations already own it. They're saying, how can I use this platform better? But there's a lot within M365. So just from a higher level perspective, we've got a lot of major modules from O365 to email to Teams, Forms, Forms Pro, OneDrive, SharePoint, Power Automate, Compliance Center, and of course, integration to a wide variety of third-party products. Today's presentation, we're going to be focusing on Compliance Center. So to start the conversation, which is the topic of this presentation today, is why do you have to plan for records management in M365? In a recent poll we conducted, the #1 type of planning stated as required to ensure successful deployment of M365 is governance and compliance. Unfortunately, our surveys found that less than 50% of organizations had fully developed their ECM requirements before implementing pieces of M365, and only 13% had set up Compliance Center for their organization. What's the result of a lack of Compliance Center planning and setup? We're finding through our surveys and discussions and interviews with folks all around the United States that organizations are experiencing increased risks associated with user acceptance of the platform, compliance, fulfilling records requests, litigation, breach, and sprawl. The answer is decreasing the risks and user acceptance and compliance through proper planning for records management and transition to M365. I'd like to turn the floor over to Cindy, our Certified Records Manager, to talk further about how to plan for records management in M365. Cindy?
Thank you very much indeed, George, and welcome everyone. If your organization is moving to M365 and looking to use the Compliance Center as your records management solution, it is imperative that you properly plan for this before plunging in. Today, I will review 3 parts of the M365 records management landscape to help plan. First is understanding the life cycle of records in the M365 environment. Second, setting up retention rules in Compliance Center for the records retention schedule. And third, applying tools to content to enable retention and disposition of records in the M365 ecosystem. I will also discuss other issues to consider when implementing the records management in M365. Let's jump right into part one, understanding records lifecycle in M365. Beginning with capture, which is creating and receiving content, such as through email, team sites, SharePoint, and other apps. Using the content is the capacity to read, modify, and manage versions. Storing requires organizing and retaining the information at a location so it is findable and accessible. Analyze, categorize, and label content for searching. This is especially important for e-discovery. Now more than ever, protecting your records and information is vital to comply with privacy and security obligations. You can classify sensitive information, conduct data loss prevention, and apply legal holds. And finally, dispositioning is systematically archiving or disposing of records or information at the end of the life cycle. All this now is fundamentally possible in M365 through the Compliance Center or other components of M365. So it is important to update your RIM program for effective lifecycle management. So many organizations have outdated programs that aren't conducive to the digital world, especially now that many are moving towards the cloud. So have enforceable policies with integrated processes, develop procedures and guidelines, create awareness and training, plan for full lifecycle management. Now let's fast forward to part two, setting up the rules in the Compliance Center for disposition at the end of the lifecycle. First, you have to establish the rules by identifying what types of records are in scope and how long to retain them for. To set up the retention rules in the Compliance Center, create a file plan from the record categories in your records retention schedule through the retention labels. Create retention label policies to form functional group schedules for documents, folders, or locations. This can be done manually, or you can upload this through a spreadsheet. Another way of creating retention is through a retention policy, which can be used for locations such as Exchange, team sites, OneDrive, and SharePoint sites. Are you confused already? Don't worry, I'll have more on this. But remember that we're videotaping this. We're taping this, so this will be available for you to review later. But first, let's get everyone on common grounds for records management, because we have a diverse audience of professionals from RIM, IT, legal, senior management, among others. So bear with me as I go through some of the basic definition for everyone's benefit. The goal of records management, in a nutshell, is the ability to find what you need, when you need it, comply with policy to keep or not to keep, at the lowest possible cost and with maximum efficiency at the minimal risk. A records retention schedule is a listing of company records with the time period for which they must be retained. A record category is an identifiable group of records with a designated retention period based on the regulatory, legal, business, or historical requirements of the category group. Now, most companies have a functional schedule, that is a hierarchical structure for formatting the records retention schedule, so it can be easily understood and applied to records listed on the schedule. And finally, a retention period is a time frame for which the record must be retained from the specified trigger date, such as date of creation, receipt, last modified, or a lapse of an event. Now that we have some of these basics under our belt, let's translate this to M365 language. At the heart of all RIM programs is the records retention schedule. In M365, the term file plan is used, and it is merely a listing of records from the records retention schedule. And this is created through retention labels from the record categories from the retention schedule, and includes description of the records and all its attributes. Then from the retention labels, you would create retention label policy. These are groupings of records like the old functional schedule that you have. Then there's the retention policy, which is a fixed retention period for a designated time frame that would be applied to a body of content. Here is a summary of the definitions. And let's dig right into each of these steps, starting with the records retention schedule and creating the file plan in the Compliance Center. Now, I'd like to go over the definition of a records retention schedule because that is the backbone of a RIM program. It is a listing of official company records that must be retained for a specified retention period for regulatory, legal, business, or historical purposes in compliance with the company's policy. And as I mentioned, most companies have a functional or a hierarchical format. A prerequisite to setting up records management in M365 is that you have a usable and up-to-date records retention schedule, which may mean that some companies have to update their program and policy and even develop a brand new schedule because the old one is obsolete. Or at the very least, consolidate or simplify the record categories in an existing schedule into big buckets. Review the legal requirements, minimize the number of retention periods, and use of event-based retention. So what does all this mean in M365? Well, I'd like to share that in Compliance Center, the file plan is a flat file, which is just a listing of all the records that need to be managed with the retention rules. So the fewer categories that you have from your records retention schedule, the easier it will be to apply and manage. So now that you have an updated usable records retention schedule, let's transfer that information to Compliance Center to set up the file plan. You do this by creating retention labels from the record categories, which is now consolidated and simplified. Previously, a retention label was known as a content type, and in records management is also known as a record series. So it is important to use clear and broadly inclusive categories so that your users are not confused with choices that they have for selecting the right category. When establish the retention label, you input the elements in the fields provided, such as the ID, name, description, retention period, retention triggers, and the primary function of that record, such as finance, IT, legal, etc. So here are some examples of the retention label that you may want to create. Jordan is going to give us a demonstration in the actual Compliance Center so that you can see how this is all set up. Now, it is important to note that the regulatory citations are not maintained in the Compliance Center, but you can use another field to denote some of these citations. Okay. After you create the retention labels, you can group these labels or categories into retention label policies that can be used for departments, functions, or roles that are aligned to the businesses. So, for example, if you want to create a finance policy or a finance retention label policy, as it is called in the Compliance Center, you would select from your list of retention labels that you have created in your file plan as such, and so on. Now, please note that we've created a finance policy, accounting policy, litigation policy. In a traditional functional schedule, you would have a hierarchy of finance and then various sub-functions under finance. However, in the Compliance Center, you do not have the ability to set up hierarchies. So each policy, it's at its own level. So for example, litigation previously might have fallen under legal, but now it's its own policy. So you can actually set up whatever policies are needed. It's very flexible. Also note that, for example, you have project files at the bottom of each policy. So each retention label or record category can be used across multiple policies. Whereas in the traditional retention schedule, it can only be listed once. It's a one for one. But now in Compliance Center, it's one to many. Another major difference I would like to point out in M365 versus records management terms is retention policy versus retention periods. Now, there are two types of retention periods. There's a time-based or an event-based. A time-based trigger is triggered on a fixed retention trigger date, and such as date created or date modified. An event-based is triggered on the passing of an event, such as close of contract, termination of employee, and settlement of claim. However, in M365, a retention policy refers to a single retention period with a fixed time frame that is applied to a location, site, or server, and it can only be time-based. If you wish to use an event-based retention, you have to do that through the retention labels. So for example, retention policies that you might want to create would be a 90-day retention policy for your Exchange inbox, or 3-year for certain SharePoint sites, 2-year for Team sites, 1 year for OneDrives. These are just examples and are by no ways suggestions or recommendations for these retention periods. So let's recap. Again, it is important to plan for records management in M365 because they do not speak the same language, but their goals are effectively the same. So let's now move on to applying rules to the content, part 3. There are two approaches to enable retention and disposition of records. One is to manage it in place or manage it centrally. So as you plan for your M365 records management, you should consider whether you want to manage in place or manage centrally. It's not a one or the other. You can use a combination of both, but it is important to plan out what type of content you want to manage in place and what type of content you want to move to a central location. And it is in these locations where you would trigger disposition, manage the workflow for disposition approval, apply and release legal holds, and then ultimately archive or dispose of the records. So plan which approach to use. Retention in place or manage in place is applying retention and disposition wherever the record resides without redirecting it to another location. This is implemented by applying individual retention labels or retention label policies to the following. It can be applied to at the document level, folder level, document library level, or to individuals, or it can be role-based. And these typically are applied in Teams, SharePoint sites, or OneDrive, and among other applications. But in Exchange, as I mentioned, you can only apply a retention policy, a fixed retention period throughout your Outlook. For a centralized location as the alternative method, you would need to create shared or central repositories, declare records, create processes and workflow to move content to the shared or central repository. This is then you would apply the rules, trigger disposition, manage the workflow, and ultimately archive or dispose of the records. And finally, I'd like to mention some other considerations for planning records management in M365. It's the big elephant in the room, which is your old records, otherwise known as legacy records, and it is in paper and electronic format. What happens if you ignore this? There's the cost of storage over time, loss of access, loss of content knowledge. The files can get corrupted. There's discovery and request risks, breach of privacy, and personal data. Another consideration is the cleanup process. Do you want to clean up pre-migration or post-migration, or a combination thereof? You can run analytics to identify records by date, file type, content type, or role. Eliminate the rot. Reduce non-records. In summary, planning is the key to properly setting up and applying records management in M365. It is important that your organization perform an audit of your records management program. Review your policies, refresh your records retention schedule, develop processes, and create procedures. Most of all, you need to plan how you are going to translate your records management program into the M365 environment, and then provide education not only to your employees and users, but constantly educate yourself. Plan before you leave. And now I'm going to turn over the presentation to Jordan, who's going to walk us through some the Compliance Center. Thank you very much. Jordan?
Thank you, Cindy. I'll just take over the screen share here in a second. And if Cindy or Jared can let me know that everything's up and running, I will get started.
Yeah, you are good to go.
Excellent. So I'll just turn the camera on. I'm Jordan from Cadence. I didn't get the intro at the start with a couple different speakers, but we're based out of Edmonton. We're a specialist in OpenText, Microsoft, and SAP. So we do digital transformation. So on this webinar, I'm the demo guy, usually my role as well. So I'll kind of just cover a few things I'm going to show off in the Compliance Center side of things. I'll go through the file plan. Cindy had a really good planning and concept there in terms of what's required to be undertaken before you actually move into the technology. I want to cover case closure of records. This is a question we get asked all the time. One of the previous gaps in the 365 ecosystem natively was the inability to close out case records without needing a third-party add-on and that kind of thing. So the example I'll go through is when a contract's completed, we actually want to go and apply a different retention label and start to make that record immutable. I'll go through some sensitivity labels. If you haven't seen sensitivity labels, I think you'll be pretty impressed in terms of its power and how documents can be labeled automatically and classified based on on the content inside of the document or record, as well as pattern recognition. So social security numbers, social insurance numbers, patent IDs, anything we want to kind of have the ecosystem of 365 search inside of the content. I'll go through legal holds. I've worked with a lot of other ECM and content services applications, and I'm really impressed with the 365 legal hold capability. And specifically, it's a very wide feature set. It covers everything under 365, which it should, of course. And it also has that ability to go very deep in terms of how content is collected, how you can target a custodian or a user, and going into different areas inside of different applications, Exchange / Outlook, OneDrive, Teams, which everybody's been using the past couple of years. And then I'll show off a little bit about data loss prevention. So we do have about 20 minutes. One question I do want to ask, kind of with a show of hands, so if everybody's moving the mouse now, how many people on the webinar today have attempted something in records management in 365? Set up a file plan, played with any of these features on the screen? If you can just hit that raise hand button, I'd just like to take a look because we always kind of try to gauge the audience there. So we're approaching 10-ish. Excellent. A little less than I thought, but that's good. We're going to learn something today. So, all right, I'm going to jump out of PowerPoint. and I'll jump into the actual demonstration, and we'll go through this shortly here. So I'll just move this over. The picture of the day from Microsoft is a rhino with two birds on it. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to jump in here. We're logged into one of our development tenants here. If you see me present before, it's a pretty standard environment for us now as we build out additional functionality. What actually is in this environment is we have a number of different test users, administrators, records managers, and it gives us the ability to actually just go through here in real time and look at different components of the Compliance Center. So conveniently now, Compliance Center is its own app, or at least app link inside of 365. We're going to open that up, and I'll walk through going through one of the file plans here. So if you haven't seen this before, and you're looking at doing the licensing side of things, I actually gave a presentation probably 6 months ago that's available on our website at Cadence on the licensing components required for different levels of access in the Compliance Center. Short summary on that is, if you're going to do full-blown records management, you're going to need E5, G5, or G5 if you're government from Microsoft. That gives you full access to the Compliance Center and the ability to go do the things that I'm going to show you here. So there's lots of different areas here. We could probably go through and do a 2-hour webinar on this. Maybe one more show of hands. Is there a lot more interest in seeing the Compliance Center exclusively in a webinar, like a full demonstration, over an hour? Is that too long? If you can just throw your hands up there if you're interested in seeing more of that, just raise your hand so we know how to develop our next webinar. On the records management.
Yeah, quite a bit of people there.
All right, take notes, Jared.
You bet.
I can't see anything right now. I'm sharing. So I'm just going to load up the records management side. The one piece I have seen with 365 and the development side of things is it does run a bit slower than a production instance. So a couple lessons in the file plan. So of course you can see any pending dispositions, and the end game of the records is very transparent here. But as you're actually building out your file plan, if you're doing things in a rush or you're going through an implementation, it takes time to publish the actual file plan, and it can take up to 24 hours. So we haven't seen it take a full 24 hours. We've usually been under 24 hours, and one time it took about 4 days, which was quite interesting. But I'm going to go through and create a label, and then we'll publish it. We'll let the system do its thing, and we'll move on to some other features in terms of applying a label and what that looks like. So if we're actually going to go ahead and create a label here, we'll just call it webinar label. We can add a description for users or administrators. So if you do have those scope notes or anything we want to add in, we can. If there's a reference ID, what feature that really impresses me is the citation. So if you want to actually track your citations here, I've worked on records management projects coming up on 12 years, and there's always that spreadsheet with the master linkage to all the citations. If we can do that in here, we should encourage that. We have the different authorities. If we want to choose an authority, we can add those in ourselves as well. So if you want to track the full side of the retention schedule and all the little T's and C's around it, they can be put in here. Categories and business functions. So if you do want to apply the label to a specific business function or add a new business function or department, basically develop that tree, that can be done here as well. So we're going to take the generic road now in the essence of time and just kind of move forward. So this is leaning on a bit of what Cindy mentioned. So are we retaining things for a specific period of time? Are we marking items as record? What's our retention period? Are we basing that on an event? So if we do want to have a retention period, let's say the stereotypical 7 years, we want to retain things for 7 years, and we want to start the retention period based on a field. And the example I'll show in a bit is the output of that on a contract that's closed. So when we actually want to go through here, what do we want to base that on? One of the gaps previously and why those third-party records companies really, made a lot of money the last 10-ish years was their ability to do a function like this. The ability to go grab end of life of an asset, an incident date on something that you're tracking on more of a case function, end of a project or closure. These events are stored in a different area in here, but you define them and then you grab the fields around that. Wrong button. If we want to mark everything as a record, we do want to retain things for a period of time, we can do that. And it really starts to lock down those users, which is really what we want to do most of the time after a certain stage of them working with the documents/records. At the end of the retention period, we're going to pick our end game. Are we deleting items automatically? More than likely, we're going to trigger a disposition review, and we're going to pick a few reviewers along the way. If we're doing nothing, I don't know why we're doing this, but we could retain things for 7 years. Moving forward, if we do have multiple stages, so we've worked a lot with the open text system. It does a really good job of stages and reviewers. Microsoft's kind of leveling up to that level now in the record side of things. So we can do reviews can consist of multiple stages, and as we add those reviewers, we can go through different stages. Typically, it's going through department level approval of a records representative or at least a manager or director level, somebody that's going to give the records folks the ability to do their job and perform that final disposition. So in this department review, we're going to send this over to Lee. Just 1 second to pull up. And Lee's one of our users within, of course, 365 in the Compliance Center as well. We're going to review and finish, create this label. Let this submit briefly. And the general concept as this publishes or as this submits is in 365, as you go through those records areas, anything in the Compliance Center, is a left to right concept in terms of where you're at in configuration as well. So while this is finishing up, we're just going to crack a new tab open and let that do its thing. So on the records management side in here, you'll see that we've went through the file plan. I'm not going to go through every single piece here. We're going to need a lot more time than the 15 or so minutes I have today. But essentially, once you have your file plans, they need to be published. So once they're published, they will show up as a label policy. And when they're showing up as a label policy, we can choose 2 methods of applying that. We can auto apply a label, meaning if a piece of content or a pattern is inside of the document, we want to automatically apply a retention schedule to that or a label to that content, or we can manually publish it. Now, as an implementer, we see a lot of the downfall of allowing users to do anything in records. So we use inheritance principles as well as auto publish or auto applying and auto selection of those by the system, as opposed to a user that doesn't care as much about records as they should. So on the file plan side of things, this webinar label is right now deemed inactive. We're going to go ahead and publish this. And we can walk through the publishing of the label. So we can choose to have this adaptive. So we can select different scopes for this, define users and groups, or we can choose static. And I'm going to choose static for now. And we get to pick the locations we actually specify this to. So to show you as many as possible, we can apply this label, this retention schedule on just email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, or any combination here of these fields. So if you're just looking at targeting a specific SharePoint site, we're going to do something more like this, and we can either include or exclude specific sites. So if we know something's really sensitive, we're dealing with intellectual property, and it's always stored in this library, in this site, let's just target that label to that site. It also, in my opinion, saves the publishing time from the actual tenant as well. So right now, we're just going to apply this on SharePoint sites. Name the policy, and you'll see everything here, specifically the 1 day for labels to appear to the users. Labels won't appear in Outlook and the web app for mailboxes that have at least 10 megs of data. So if you're using one of those throughput mailboxes, accounts payable, or something that's constantly just churning things in and out, be aware of that setting. We'll submit these labels. I'm going to jump into SharePoint and show the case closure side of this. So in our SharePoint site, just to kind of set the context here, we have a number of different areas in contract management within our procurement site. Contracts are stored by vendor, so we have a number of different vendors. In the Cadence Corporation folder, inside of our library, we have a document set, and the document set is called a contract workspace. So in this area, we're going to create a new contract. We're going to add a couple documents into that contract document set, and then we're going to actually close the contract and see that this retention label on the far right here will actually automatically apply. It takes a couple minutes for it to do it, but it does automatically do that. So go through and just create a contract. If you've seen me demo before, I usually go to contracts. My whole implementation life pre-records was all contract management. We'll pick our vendor. There's lots of opportunity for automation here, not the context of the demonstration and presentation today. We're going to pick our contract type. We'll do a statement of work. We'll just say it runs throughout December. We're currently drafting the contract, and we'll say it's out to Jordan. We'll create this set. Inside of this set right now, we have nothing pertaining to the label itself. So right here, you'll see apply label, and it says choose label. Right now, it's completely empty. Now, if we want, we can have our users select a label. Just for demo purposes, I'm going to select something completely boring so you can see that it switches. We'll just say that this is a, a sales document for now. I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to go upload some documents. It's going to automatically inherit that label as well from the set. So that's a huge win. As long as we make the right call on the set, we can make the right call downstream on the documents without needing to bother the user and potentially have them make a mistake on it. Now, if we want to do something even more interesting, we can actually create templates here, and we can push these placeholders from the document set into these templates for more of an automated contract management solution. Not the context of this, but we will have an upcoming webinar next year on that. So if that is of interest, just put your hand up and we'll make sure we get that on the calendar a little earlier than we were planning. So it's a contract management webinar in terms of automating contracts. We constantly get asked about contracts, accounts payable, and HR onboarding. Those are three scenarios that we get asked a lot to demonstrate and implement. Inside of this Cadence Corp area, if let's say we're done with the webinar contract document set, we can actually go over here. Let's make this a little bigger. And we can actually close this out. So one of our fields here is the status. And our contract status, we're going to set to closed, saying we've done everything else. It's approved. It's closed. What's going to happen behind the scenes, take a few minutes to run, is you're going to see the retention label change from what it's set to, which is our sales document, to statement of work. And that will actually make it immutable and push that down to all the records inside of this document set as well. So same concept, we're going to lock everybody down, we're going to apply the appropriate retention, and we're going to move on from there. So I'm going to jump over to another department here while that runs. You know what? We'll just duplicate the tab so we can jump back. We're going to jump into HR, and I'm going to show off both sensitivity labels and the data loss prevention side of things. So here at Cadence, we have an employee data sheet that's required to be filled out by everybody. So we know if they're who their emergency contact's going to be and everything else. And in that data sheet, there's a bunch of sensitive information. So I'm going to open this data sheet here. We're going to see that we have a social insurance number. So I'm just going to copy this for now. It's a fake one, by the way. For our American friends, it's a social security number. In Canada, it's a social insurance number. We do a ton of work in America, so usually I mix those terms up. I'm going to add a new document to this area right now. just to kind of show that it's clean, we're going to take out everything, add this document, and then we're going to put in that sensitive information and watch 365 actually tag that information. So clear this one out. Load this into the system. If this doc was shareable, we can actually go in here and share this document out. Right now it's inheriting the mutable access here of lock. So we're just going to cheat and unlock that for the demo. So if it is locked, you can't change it. You can only view it. It almost puts you in a track changes mode if you've seen that before. It's quite interesting, also quite frustrating when you're trying to configure a few things. We're going to open this document up in the browser. Let the table load up. And what we're looking for this to do is go through and see that this document contains PII information. So it's inheriting that from the previous copy. Now, what it will do is it will recognize the pattern of the social insurance number and start to tag that and lock down that document. And you'll see it get flagged as PII. We can optionally go through and change that information as well. And what we'll also get is emails coming in as we're logged in as this user saying, you know, dear user, you're not supposed to be doing this stuff with this information. And if you did have this document shared, it's now going to be unshared or restricted. So you'll get these kind of emails open. So to Adams who we're logged in as, this is a policy by the organization. We've detected issues in terms of data loss. So if this item was shared, it's now going to be restricted from that side of things. So there is communication that goes out to the users as well. So I'm running up against the clock pretty hard here. I got about 2 minutes and then we'll open it up for questions. So I'll jump over the hold side of thing in the Compliance Center as well. And we'll go through the advanced side of holds. So the advanced e-discovery is where you want to be. There's the core side. It's for different licensing. If you really want to do legal holds, discovery, and e-discovery in 365, you're going to want the advanced side of things. In terms of, you know, pre-cooked things that we've kind of spun up for the presentation today,